Hello, I'm Richard Gisbert, and you're at The Listening Post. This week, Turkey and Article 301. Do changes in the law finally add up to a free press there? It's been a year since the disappearance of Madeleine McCann.
We're not characters, we're not a soap opera, we're far from perfect, we're ordinary people.
How her parents have coped under the media spotlight. Myanmar, its state-run media, and the coverage of the cyclone disaster. And the Italian sports media and football. Emotion 1, objectivity 0. Welcome back. In the 3 years of its existence, Turkey's infamous Article 301 has represented a serious obstacle to freedom of speech in that country. By making it a crime to insult the vague concept of Turkishness, the law has been used to crack down on the news media, political opposition groups, even authors. Last month, in an effort to smooth the country's application for entry into the European political union, the Turkish government agreed to change the contentious law. Our starting point this week, Article 301. The reforms, will they be enough to lead to freedom of the press in Turkey, enough to get the country a place in Europe? It's rare that a law, a piece of legislation, becomes part of a country's national identity, its international image. However, even Turkey's foreign minister, Ali Babacan, has admitted that Article 301 is to Turkey what Levi's 501s are to jeans. The press law has become part of the Turkish brand.
Basically what it said was that it gave up to 3 years in jail for those who insulted Turkishness and various different organs of the Turkish state, including various military organs, the parliament, and various other different parts of the Turkish state.
It enabled prosecutors in Turkey to open cases against writers, intellectuals, journalists, and others who they believe insulted Turkishness or insulted the Turkish state. And if found guilty by the court, they could get a jail sentence for up to 3 years.
Turkey has been trying to enter the European Union for more than 20 years. However, the EU has made it clear that laws like 301 hurt Turkey's chances, since they impede free speech. 301 has been used to shut down websites like YouTube, when critics of Turkey, presumed to be Greek, have used the sites to mock the country's founder, Mustafa Kemal Atatürk. Other casualties of the law include Orhan Pamuk, a Nobel Prize-winning novelist who was charged after saying that 1 million Armenians or more had died at Turkish hands in World War I. Hrant Dink was the editor of a Turkish-Armenian newspaper, Agos, and he also wrote about that period of history. He was charged 3 times under 301, convicted once, and later paid for his writings with his life.
Last January, he was shot to death by a young man who appears to have been acting out of nationalist instincts. He was offended, or he claims to have been offended by what Dink had said. He shot him 3 times in the back of the head. Dink died. He's the most obvious and famous victim of 301.
All of these cases and criticism by the EU finally led the government to change the law. The main changes mean that prosecutors who, under the old law, could launch their own investigations under 301, now must refer such cases up to the political level, to Turkey's Minister of Justice. Where the old law made it illegal to insult Turkishness, a term that's very difficult to define, the new law specifies that attacks against the Turkish nation are illegal. And there are changes in the penalties. Previously, a conviction under Article 301 could mean up to 3 years in prison. That's now down to 2 years. The amended law made news in Turkey. However, the reaction the government in Ankara was looking for came from Brussels and the European Union.
The reform of Article 301 is a very much welcome step forward. It indicates that this issue is going into the right direction. We are still not there, but we are progressing.
If it wasn't for European Union, nobody would touch 301. 301 would stay there. Thanks to European Union, 301 is changed now. And now we will have to wait and see the implementation.
The European Union was very, very keen to see it changed, and they seem to be quite happy now that it is changed. But the fact does remain that there's a good half a dozen other articles which remain, and which, while they're not quite as outrageous as 301, they are used repeatedly by prosecutors to restrict people's freedom of speech in the country.
There are articles that prevent any kind of insults to the courts, that prevents insults to the president, that talk about trying to incite racial hatred, that because of the nebulous and vague definitions can perhaps be used in the future to try to limit freedom of speech in Turkey. They themselves could become the new Articles 301. And in fact, the European Union has, while welcoming the changes to Article 301, has also informed Turkey very, very clearly that this is not the end of the road. They also have to change those 20 or 30 other articles.
With those other laws still on the books, it will be up to Turkish journalists to determine through their reporting if things have really changed for the Turkish media.
It will depend on the implementation. Because, you know, our laws, when you read them, are quite liberal. But the problem comes from the interpretation and implementation of those laws. One judge reads it differently or comments it differently, the other one is differently. That is the problem.
Others see laws like 301 as mere symptoms of larger problems in the way Turks see the media and the media's relationship with the state.
Generally, Turkey suffers from a deep-rooted problem, namely that the legal system considers its job is to protect the state rather than the individual, or rather than protecting civil rights and civil liberties. So this mentality pervades the legal system, pervades the political system, and that's really the problem, the challenge that really lies at the root of the Article 301 problem in Turkey.
And as Turkey struggles to deal with that challenge, its media are reporting on that story, one that they themselves have a big stake in. Our Global Village Voices now with their take on reforming Turkey's Article 301.
The reforms of Article 301, I think it's just going to be loosely interpreted, and it depends on the interpretations of the judges. I don't think there's going to be much difference. The problem is criticising Turkey constructively still will be seen as humiliation depending on the words used by the journalists, and that's going to all be down to interpretations and semantics. So I don't think that the reforms are enough. I think most of it is definitely cosmetic.
Well, as a journalist, before I had no problems with the Article 301, but now some of my colleagues there. So with the change now, I think most of the journalists will feel more free in Turkey now, because I can say there were some fear in the hearts, but now they don't have anything to fear anymore. And I really think that it's something really good for Turkish press freedom as well.
The government are trying to change a lot of things. They're trying to get with EU standards, but a lot of the newspapers and the TV are vilifying them for making these changes and making them out to be as if they're selling the country to America and to the EU, which I don't believe is the case at all. Turkey has to go forward now. I think it's just stuck in this old past, this old secularist past, and it needs to now move on forwards, and there has to be more rights for people.
If you have issues with the way the news media cover the news and you want to talk about them, email us at listeningpost@aljazeera.net, and we'll find a way via webcam, maybe even a camera phone, to get you on the air as one of our Global Village Voices. It's time now for some quick hits from the world of media. Listening Post News Bites. Myanmar, the country formerly known as Burma, is struggling to cope with that huge cyclone and a death toll that's now into the tens of thousands. State-run television and news agency footage have shown troops working to clear streets and rebuild infrastructure. However, opposition media, including outlets based in neighboring Thailand, report the aid work has been concentrated in areas near key military sites. Myanmar severely restricts access to foreign journalists and has cracked down even more since the pro-democracy riots last year, so it's tough to get a clear picture of how bad things really are there. After more than 6 years behind bars, Sami al-Hajj, the only journalist to be held at Guantanamo Bay, has finally been freed. Al-Hajj was working as a cameraman for Al Jazeera's Arabic channel when he was captured by Pakistani forces late in 2001 and eventually handed over to the U.S. military. The Pentagon accused al-Hajj of being involved in arms trafficking for al-Qaeda, but al-Hajj was never charged, never sent to trial.
The Sudanese-born journalist was flown to Khartoum, where he was reunited with family members who say he lost almost 30 kilograms after spending the last 14 months of his captivity on a hunger strike. Frances Townsend is not a well-known name, despite her time in the Bush administration. She's just the latest Bush staffer to be hired by a major U.S. news outlet. Townsend is a former Homeland Security advisor to President Bush, and she's been hired as a commentator by CNN. Other Bush aides who are now embedding into the mainstream U.S. media include the former White House spokesman Tony Snow, who also went to CNN, and former Bush Chief of Staff Karl Rove, who now writes for Newsweek. Media critics in the U.S. argue that the media, who claim that they were fooled by the Bush administration on the Iraq War issue, have no business hiring some of the people who fooled them.
I want to just stipulate at the beginning of this interview, we are declaring a Reverend Wright-free zone today.
When Barack Obama appeared on CNN just ahead of the latest primaries, his interviewer made an unusual declaration. He promised he would not ask any more questions about Obama's controversial church pastor, Jeremiah Wright. John Roberts said he thought Americans were tired of the Wright stuff. He wanted to deal with real issues. However, the same could not be said of Tim Russert, who interviewed Obama on NBC's Meet the Press.
What has the controversy over Reverend Jeremiah Wright done to your campaign?
Well, obviously, it's distracted us.
You're still a member of the church?
I am.
Why do you think he reemerged? Could you have handled this better, differently, by severing your ties earlier? And what's the most important thing you've learned from this? Is it fair for people to raise questions about your judgment for misjudging Reverend Wright?
Russert's first 11 questions were about Reverend Wright, who's not running for anything, an indication that the U.S. mainstream news media are not about to let go of the story. Coming up after the break, it was one of the world's biggest news stories of the past year. Now, Madeleine McCann's parents talk about their treatment at the hands of the media.